Um, I would say actually that for a board, a preponderance of East is good because we are supposed to be setting policy and direction and not necessarily getting into the nitty gritty of things. So I think that that's a, a good position for Alex to be in as a leader because we won't step on her toes in terms of trying to actually do things that are her purview to do. Um, we seem a little short on South, although that was one of the ones that I considered for myself also. So I think just for working with us as a team, uh, for Alex helping us to find a consensus with each other might be sometimes a challenge.
I've never in my experience doing these activities with boards for years, I've never seen 2/3 of the board have the East as the area. That is a unique experience to see that. It is unique. Other folks, thoughts on your blend of areas?
Barbara, you have to mute too.
Anyone like to share their thoughts?
Heidi's
Please.
raising her hand. Go ahead, Heidi.
You got to unmute.
That will help if I unmute. I apologize. I think what's interesting and I think a little challenging, looking at this, and many of us said this, that many of us are also East and West, and I could see myself in all, North, South, East, and West. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint just one, but I think it's important to be well-rounded and listening to others as well. But being part of North, South, East, and West, and also I think taking a little bit of a chance. When I look at North, it's kind of just diving in and seeing where you're going to become at the other side.
Others, thoughts?
Can we shut the PA? Is there a reason not to?
So
Barbara, you have thoughts?
yeah, I'm trying. The feedback is extraordinary. I think from a West point of view, proactive, thorough communication, similar to the communication we received last Friday, continuing that will help make sure that everybody's working from the same information, because I think what happens in Norwalk is sometimes a game of telephone, and information is given to one person and then changes a little as it moves out into the community. So the more we can all have as much information as available in a timely manner and everybody get
Barbara, it's frozen.
She has.
That's odd because they're all on the same internet.
That's what I was wondering. Other folks with thoughts. What advice do you give to your new superintendent for how she should work with you with people coming from these different approaches? What advice do you have for her?
Can you repeat that? We had some audio issues here.
For sure. What advice would any of us give to Alex as far as how to work with us as a group, given the balance of our styles?
So I'll go. Oh, that was bad though, background. You guys getting that on your side? No. Okay. I think, Alex, if you started off, it can kick off with a reset of how the board interacts with central office. I think that would be super healthy. I think Sarah has said this many times, but there's this expectation by the community that we are more hands-on than we actually should be. I thoroughly believe that you guys went to school for this. You've done this for an extensive amount of time. Many of you are at the highest level of education in your fields, and you should really be steering us versus us steering you, and that we really truly should be a backstop and representing the questions of the community, and maybe some suggestions of the committee, but we shouldn't be at the helm. So for me personally, I think it would be very healthy to just do that sweeping reset and just make sure we know our place. And that's not to say that we're going to lean back and not get involved. It's just a clear definition of roles and responsibilities, so we are not taking valuable time out of your day, and that, you know, pulling what should be focused on children away from children just to appease adults.
Anyone else with thoughts?
Godfrey, you're muted. Godfrey, you got to unmute. There you go.
I think it's
Thank you.
extremely important, you know, that there's a refocus on assuring youth are heard. You know, when looking at the majority of the people in the district, it's our students. And I think when looking at work with kids, I've never worked with someone where we've been in 100% agreement. And the disagreements are the things that really move the work forward for our youth. And the comfortability to be direct and be transparent and lean on us for help and engage us to help, to me, are things that help just recalibrate our attention to youth. And within that process, you know, what opportunities to hear them more. The care and role that adults have, you know, in assuring the safety and, you know, the needs are met for students in that process, especially in response to just us coming out of COVID, the opportunity to really hear them has not been given, I believe, the right amount of attention. And I think in looking how to keep the board consistent on policy that really benefit the youth and also staff, allowing opportunity to have youth give input that's meaningful for us to move forward with, to me would be the most important advice I share.
Okay. Let's see if there's any one other person that has any advice to share with Alex about the directions before we jump into the next component, and then ask Alex that from her experience that she's had, however brief it might be, have you noticed these different directions people are coming from? What does it bring? What flavors does it bring to the district that are unique and wonderful?
Does anyone else have something to add before we toss it over to Alex?
Alex, why don't you jump in?
I'll push my mic down so I can talk. So based on what I hear, it really concurs with a lot of the things that I've seen in my conversations already with many of the board members. One being the passion for doing this work for children and to ensure that all children, not just some, but all children get what they need to be successful. I think that that's a piece that has resonated not only in what Godfrey said today, but I've heard that same piece of information throughout my conversations with board members. The conversation around building clear lines of communication is something that we've engaged in conversation. And I think it's going to be really important, and not only for me to be able to do the work, but for the cabinet at large, because I think everybody knows the work in central office is very fast paced and my goal is to make sure that it's very student centered. And in order to do that effectively, we have to structure very clear systems of communications to do that. And in my conversations with board members, it's very clear to me that they want to make sure the district is successful, and there's a willingness to do that in a collaborative manner. So I'm really excited about bridging the focus of children first with ensuring that our system is structured in such a way that effectively meets the needs of all children. And communication to do that is key.
Very good. Thank you. I promise you, normally this just flows as one consistent piece and it just leads right into the next activity. So sorry about those technical challenges, but we are going to persist and we are going to move forward. I'm going to put the screen share on so that we can see what we are talking about here. And first of all, I want to make sure, Alex, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see it? Thank you. Great. So wanted to start off with just some grounding. You have your governance policies that are in place. You have pretty darn clear governance policies that are out there. And with them, as we were going through these, Alex and I, it's really a helpful point for her. Because, you know, when you think about it in life, there's really about three things you need to know. You need to know the rules of the game. You need to know the score. You need to know how much time's left on the clock. And you've done a nice job laying that out in the rules that you've put in place through your policy and laying out what the roles of the individuals are. And you very clearly point out to the superintendent that she's encouraged to conduct the operations of the school system according to a management team concept. You want her to build a great team of leaders to support her. You lay that out there and to work with the district and to do good things for children. And at the same point in time, while she's doing that work, the board prefers a structure which the superintendent's that unitary executive responsible to the board of ed. You want one person focused on that and reporting to you. You're going to manage one particular individual. They're then going to manage the rest of the team. Lays it out very clearly. Then as you go a little bit further with your administrative line responsibility policy, talks about the fact that it should flow clearly. And I love the way you put this. You have students first. From students to teachers to administrators and the superintendent from the Board of Ed, but it's focused on students. And whenever possible, staff should have one immediate supervisor for any one function. You've laid that out very clearly for Alex. Now, in doing that, the other policies that are important for Alex, you've laid out that as the superintendent, each year the board will evaluate her according to the guidelines in a mutually determined and agreed upon rules of the game. And you've got that in policy. You've used a process for that, which later tomorrow, when Robert Avosa is working with you and Alex, talk a little bit about what does that look like for the coming year? How do you want to frame that? And then from there, you go next into regarding communication, that you want all communications to the board or any committee from the board from staff members shall be submitted through the superintendent of schools. You've made it clear that you want the superintendent to be the one engaging you and communicating with you. So you've laid out some very clear rules of the game to follow and to operate under. That is very, very helpful for a superintendent. And when you look at those rules as they're laid out, when you think about what do the strongest governance teams do, there's really some universal points for what those strong governance teams do. It's very much aligned with what the Connecticut School Boards groups lay out, what the National School Boards Association lays out. There's very clear tenets for the highest functioning governance teams, what they do. And I think it's important that we talk about not highest performing boards, but highest performing governance teams, looping Alex in as a member of that governance team. And the first point, as Godfrey said, talked about the voice of children, just united overall in the service of children. It's why you want to be on the board. You want to do great things for children. And you come with that motive, and everything you do is focused on that. Those strongest governance teams, the second piece that they do is they realize that you have an interdependent relationship. I have never seen a highly successful board with an ineffective superintendent do great things for students. And at the same point in time, I've never seen a highly successful superintendent with a board that doesn't function well do great things for students. They have too much time working not together and rowing in the same direction. It's not dependent nor independent, it's interdependent, and you understand the roles. You own it, she operates it. Very clear. The third piece is having those clear indicators of success established for the district. Noticed in the evaluation format that you used for the prior superintendent, you laid out some criteria for what's important. Your policy says that you'll address that annually and you'll do it related to setting particular goals and expectations for the superintendent. Fantastic. You've got it laid out there. She knows what the target is. That lets her know what the score of the game is and how much time is left on the clock. The fourth piece being the relationship based on trust, loyalty, and respect is really as clearly as it's written. But at the same point in time, with your policy, you've got one interesting component that makes this a little more difficult. You see, you have a policy of encouraging unitary reporting structure, but yet Alex reports to 9 individuals. So Alex has to build a relationship of trust, loyalty, and respect 9 times over. And that brings some challenges sometimes for Alex when you might come with different priorities, or if you might approach a problem from the east and someone else approaches a problem from the west, and you say, I think this is how we should approach it. I think this is how we should approach it, which is perfect reason why it's important that boards have that interdependent relationship, that Alex is able to bring you all together to understand the will of the board. And the fifth and final piece is those strong boards have incredibly durable linkages with the community. And those durable linkages with the community mean that you regularly get input. You regularly get that feedback. And one of the areas that is often forgotten when people talk about those durable linkages with the community is that the students are your community as well. And student voice is such an important component of what you do. And having that regular and meaningful dialogue is exceptionally important. And I don't think it's ever been more important in our time of COVID. As families and students experience things that no one has experienced for 100+ years, going back to the Spanish flu pandemic, and even then there wasn't the technology that we have available now, those linkages are incredibly important. And in looking at that work and boiling it down to some simple graphics, if you think about what the board really does, you set the goals. You make decisions about what results for which students at what costs. Because, you know, we could have more kids in the school district reading by 3rd grade. And if that's the priority, we could do that. We could do that. We're going to raise class size to be 80-1 in high school. We're going to have nearly 3 students to 1 teacher in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. And we can do that. But we know that there are some limits to resources. So you have to make some tough decisions. You have to decide what results for which students at what costs. And that's a huge part of your role. And in doing that, though, you do it in a way where you live in this world. This is the graphic I created to show what I think the governance relationship shows. The board does the what. The staff does the how. The what includes the vision, the mission. And then there's this interesting piece in between. It's sort of a theory of action. That's your storyline that connects the vision and mission to strategy. That's where the board says, these are our priorities. This is our theory of action. We can accomplish the vision and mission if we pull these big levers. These are the things we want to focus on. And in doing that, again, you can't pull on every lever. It's just not possible. But you set those priorities. Now that's what you do. And then the staff develops a plan to operationalize that vision and mission and puts that plan in place. But the staff doesn't have the ability to determine what the goals should be. The staff has to go to the board and say, board members, here's the goals we look to accomplish this year. Is this in alignment with the expectations you have for us? And in those highest functioning systems, the board sets goals for the superintendent, and then the superintendent's goals cascade outward from there. And let me give you an example from my experience. When I became superintendent of one of the districts I was superintendent of, I arrived and the board was looking to have a new superintendent because they were concerned that academic achievement had stagnated for students, had leveled off. And they were also concerned because achievement gaps had grown. And when I got on board as superintendent, there was a 5-point rating system for administrators in the district. And what was interesting was every principal was rated 5 out of 5. every district office staff member was rated 5 out of 5. And what it caused me to think about was, gee, what's going on here? When they were running this relay race, did the principals do a great job and they handed the baton off to the district office, or the other way around? And then the superintendent just dropped the baton? That's why they wanted a new superintendent, because everyone else was doing really well. Everyone else was doing really good things. And the reality of it was that those goals were out of alignment, and that the goals that staff was held accountable for weren't in alignment with the goals that the board had for the superintendent. And you end up with a situation where everything's just fine. We're doing really well, except for the kids. So there's an incredibly important component here with, while you do the what and the staff does the how, that the superintendent puts in place structures that align other individuals' goals with the goals that you have set for her, to make sure that everyone's moving in one direction, so you don't end up with that situation where the adults can declare a year as successful. Unfortunately, the students can't. Now, obviously, there's a multitude of ways you need to measure and you need to look at those things, but making sure that you have that aligned system dramatically increases the likelihood that you increase student achievement for children. They're moving in the right direction. And when you look at that, there's this piece that there was some discussion earlier about roles, and what are people's roles, and are people getting involved in other people's roles? And, I once thought of it, it's kind of like a tennis match. And you're on one side of the net, and on the other side of the net is the staff, and one side's the board. And, interestingly, as this board, you might invite Alex to come across the net and help you think through the what. Alex, can you help us think through what we should be focused on and what we should be doing? And there's no problem with inviting her to give input on that. But I'll tell you, if she's going to be over there all the time with the what, and she makes the decisions what everything is, you get labeled a rubber stamp board. You just do what the superintendent says. You don't set the goals for the district. You don't do those things. Well, Alex has to be careful about going across and getting involved in the board's business. You do the policy. You determine what those high-level goal targets should be. Now, at the same point in time, the board may have the urge to come across the net into the how, have that superhuman strength, and you come across. I've got some really unique experiences that I'd like to help you with this particular part of the work. Well, the same thing happens in that the board member, like Alex, if she went over to the board side, may have found she likes it and she wants to dawdle and hang around there. The board may find, well, I like to be involved in these operations. You know what I want to do? I'd like to sit in a staff meeting next time. Hey, and can I sit in while we're talking about the textbook selection? Can I? And it leads to a point where the staff effectiveness gets lost, but the other piece that ultimately gets lost, you can't hold a superintendent accountable for what gets done for the achievement of results if you were the ones involved with the how. The superintendent comes and looks at you and said, I did exactly what you told me to do. I followed every step. You said you wanted to go from A to B, and you told me I needed to go through C, D, and E to get there. And I did every bit of that. So actually, when these systems are aligned, they actually help you hold individuals accountable for results. And they increase the likelihood that you will achieve the results, because Alex then can align everyone's work and you're all rowing in the same direction. Now let's take that a step further. One of my favorite lines I ever read was, chaos in the boardroom leads to chaos in the classroom. And if things aren't flowing in the boardroom, it ends up impacting the classroom directly. And the second piece of that was, superintendents are sometimes only as effective as their boards will allow them to be. But when you are an interdependent board working together, it is remarkable what you can do for children. And how when you align and you set those standards, we have a standard, Alex, that we expect that students will be engaged in key decision-making. Great, that's a board priority. We will do that, carrying it out. We will follow through with those things. But when you do those areas, when you are aligned in your responsibilities, great things happen for kids. Any discussion about what was shared? Does that ring true? Because we're going to talk in a minute. What should Alex know about how you operate? Is that the way you're functioning right now? And as a board, what advice and direction can you give Alex to be successful working with you?
So I have a comment on that.
Mhm.
Okay. So the what part of it and the board defining the what is something that I struggle with, because again, I'll go back to the executives, the cabinet, Dr. Estrella, this is their field of expertise. The fact that 9 board members who do not largely have expertise in this space can come in and set the what concerns me. And my work on other boards has been the experts in the room present something, and what they think is best based on their experience, to guide the next year. And those of us who serve as that backstop, as Sarah refers to it, vet it, and maybe we tweak it and we talk about it and we collaborate and ideate around it. But we certainly don't start the conversation if we're not the people hands-on in the room with that level of education, with that outside consultancy, coming in from trade articles and conferences. And it just seems like the board leading instead of having the perspective of the community and evaluating, that would make more sense to me.
So you actually nailed how when it works best. When it works best, this is the format. You decide the vision and mission and what is important. But then it's staff job to come up with the plan to accomplish it. And for the plan to accomplish it, they recommend the goals to you. They recommend the goals to you. You don't have to accept them. Alex could come to you and say, you know what? Third grade proficiency, we have 74% of our students proficient in third grade. And we have a 18% achievement gap between students participating in the free and reduced price lunch program and students not participating for third grade literacy. And Alex says, and you say to Alex, that's a very important area for us. We're going to tackle third grade literacy. This is going to be one of our key levers. And Alex says, well, darn right, it should be. And I'm going to put together plans to accomplish that. And Alex puts together those plans and said, here's my plan. And over the next 4 years, we are going to close that achievement gap by 0.5 point a year. So 4 years later, we will have closed that achievement gap by 2%. And you as a board say, hey, Alex, thanks for your advice. We don't think that's aggressive enough. We think you can do more than that if we really focus on that. And there's that piece of the side you're on and the sides Alex is on of working together, that there has to be that unison. And then Alex says, okay, we can do some more. So let me look at how we'll redesign the plan. And let me look at how we'll redesign the staff. And then Alex comes back to you and says, board members, I think we can do that. But we're going to need to change some things in third grade. And let me tell you the budget request that's going to take to do that. So Alex comes to you with the budget request and says, okay, we're going to do this. And you say, we can afford that part of it, but we can't afford the other part of it. And I said, okay, then I'm going to have to rearrange and redirect. It's this what and how that has this back and forth piece where you are working together to manage those pieces, but you need to invite Alex to give you that input. But Alex doesn't get to decide and say to the board, 0.5% of gap closure a year is good enough, board. You need to accept that. That's where you come in with the what of, is that acceptable? And you create the mission and vision. You agree on what that theory of action is. Then it's Alex's to carry out according to what you were driving for. Does that make sense to you, ma'am?
So I'm actually going to jump in on what Erica had said and say that I think I understand what she's saying, and it's something that I struggle with also, because the structural construction of a board of education is a little strange relative to what it's intended to accomplish. Like whenever I'm talking about being on boards with other people who don't have experience with it, I say, well, imagine if there were a board of 9 elected people in charge of dictating a hospital's policy. Like that wouldn't make any sense at all, because the people with expertise in medicine should be making the decisions as to what the goals should be even, and how things should be executed as well. So I think we're in a little bit of a particularly strange structural place where our role is actually a little bit weird. It's a little bit of a weird civic structure that 9 people without any necessary experience in education can be elected and impose their opinions in the form of direction and goal setting on people whose expertise is in the field of the job that they're doing. So I think as a board, I do use the word backstop a lot. Like we're supposed to provide oversight to make sure that nothing is going terribly awry. But in terms of dictating percentage points of goals, I personally don't feel like that's our place to do.
So let's think about that. In the structure of public schools, I once read that it is everything that is right about being public, being a public operation, that is elected members of the public manage the board. But it's actually probably everything that's wrong for running a multi-million-dollar business. Because a multi-million-dollar business wouldn't operate that way. But a multi-million-dollar business, though, also isn't reaching into the wallets and purses of the individual taxpayers to run that business. So therefore, you get the right and have the ability to elect officials. Yeah, it is an odd setup for a management structure. Very true. Now, a board can be somewhat more deferential to a superintendent's recommendations, but ultimately, you've got to have the point in time where does the chef determine if the food's good? Someone's got to make that choice. And the governance structures as set up in education are that the board is, backstop's a really interesting word to use there. I think that's a powerful word. Yeah, you say that just doesn't make sense to us. And just like it didn't make sense to say 0.5%, No Child Left Behind made no darn sense. When we did No Child Left, y'all know No Child Left Behind math, don't you? You don't know that? So in 2006, 20% of the kids were proficient. And we knew that 2014 was the golden year when 100% of kids would be proficient. So what you do is you subtract 20 from 100, you get 80. You take how many years you are between 2006 and 2014, you're 8 years. So therefore our goal must be 10% per year. Show me somebody who's grown 10% per year in student performance, and I will show you some misguided tactics. So that is the role you play to help make those judgments and make those decisions, but you rely on the expertise of the staff to advise on that. Yeah. And you do it both ways. You know, my point, you too big, too little, just right. There's a little Goldilocks to this. What
But that
seems
level,
just right?
that percentage point reference that you and Sarah have, talked about, it's a CEO's job to come to the board and say, here's the challenge, here's the proposed solutions, here are the implications, here are the consequences, down to that level of detail, versus going in reverse. I would expect it to be presented and then be evaluated through the lens of a taxpayer and a parent in the system, but not to dictate it. That just doesn't make sense to me, given that this is not
Why
our
would it go
field.
in reverse? You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I'm not recommending it go in reverse. I'm recommending she bring that to you.
Yeah.
You have the what, she does the how.
Yeah. And I think it's often the easy answer to that, being a political position, is saying you're a rubber stamp. The right answer to that is that if you choose a CEO, and I think we've done that here with Dr. Estrella, who does just that. She's coming to us not with a problem, she's coming to us with a problem, a solution, and very clear implications and consequences and everything else that we need to think about, in the big picture, in that East lens. That's not a rubber stamp. That's a board that has, selected a CEO to run a multi-million-dollar business.
If it passes your beliefs that it's reasonable in the end. If she brings you a recommendation that, I'm making this up, that you need to raise taxes by X millions of dollars to accomplish your plan, you may say, whoa, we got to step back. But that's the framework you've drawn for her.
Sure.
Now, if you take that to the next level, then what if she comes to you and says, to accomplish these goals, I'm going to shuffle all of the principals and I'm moving all the principals around next year? Do you say, you're the CEO, I got faith in you, let's go do it? Well, that's sometimes an example of where that gets put to the test of that CEO piece, because people come out and say things. This is complex stuff, because there's a variety of different things your superintendent has to consider. Madam Chair, you look like you're ready to make a comment.
I was just going to make sure that anybody else who was having ideas felt like they could jump in and say them. I feel like.
Oh, I want to make sure, like, what this board has shown is that we've come together at times where we had to, that's really allowed our role to really be demonstrated, and not going down a rabbit hole of living in this example, looking at a goal that's set, as we make motion towards that. My only experience has been that our role naturally gets defined and aligns towards meeting that goal, and in the best case scenario, the way I've always seen things is that for me to meet my goal as a board member of effective policies that really have positive impact on the youth, it requires Alex to be the leader we hired, and the more capable I am to stay in my lane as a policymaker is just continuous evidence validating the role of the leader and how well it's getting executed. And I think not talking about context really makes this more of a longer discussion than necessary. Just looking at the 9 board members, the compliment they give each other, and being clear, no matter what field you come from, there's no I that's completed or met any goal. And the people surrounding each other, we all have, I think, great things that are brought to the table that really enforce how we operate effectively as a whole. And that just gets centered in data to really just fulfill any concrete evidence for us to honestly say we're making decisions with the best knowledge we have. And data, regardless of where you come from, that term is something that is evidence, we will use the progress monitor and just really center our discussions about what's going to take place.
Other board members, thoughts before we jump into looking at standards of practice?
I'm going to jump in and I'll kind of piggyback on Godfrey, what Godfrey was mentioning as well. But, as board members, we all bring a unique skill set. We all have different backgrounds, different education, but we all come together at the table with different thoughts and different ideas, but work in unison together and to support our superintendent, which is Dr. Estrella. But in addition to that, if we aren't in agreement on something, then we talk about it. I think having those conversations all the time make a huge difference, not only for our staff, our families, our communities, as well as our students. But especially given the climate we're in now with COVID, I think the community has done tremendous work. Staff at Norwalk Public Schools, the board, parents that have now become teachers to a certain degree, all of our staff, all of our students have made a huge impact. And this is something we've never, ever have seen before. And I think we've all come together as a community. And I think that's critically important as we move forward with all the work that we need to do within the next couple of months, possibly reopening. We're not sure. We're working on all of that now. But again, all of our voices make a huge difference. And as a board, we set policy. We don't do the day-to-day managing, but we're here to support her and staff and work together.
Other board members? Well, with that as a backdrop, the superintendent gave you in advance, I believe, some documents about standards of practice. Could you please take a look at those standards of practice documents, please?
Are those in the
It's
governance
also in your
folder?
folders. And it's also online, Sarah. So they're
In,
online.
in which folder?
the
In the
governance
governance folder?
The governance folder.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, governance folder.
I'd like you to take a look at the standards of practice document. And I'm going to talk with you about that in just a moment. And we're just as a check, a self-assessment, and take a look at those standards of practice and see the alignment with what you're doing right now. So do y'all have the document open? Great. If you could take a look at the first page of that governance team self-assessment worksheet, and if you could take a look at that and you could think to yourself for each of those items, is this an area that we as a governance team have as an area of strength, an area where we're making progress, or is this an area that needs to be a priority for improvement? And I'm going to ask you to take some time, please, to look at that document, just the very first page, and think of what rating would you give the team? This is not you as a team member. This is the team overall. Take a look at that and just do the first page using the scale that is on the screen right now.
Do you mind if I be a pain and just suggest one change of one word in item 4 instead of regardless, inclusive? If we could just change that in our minds. I feel like it comes from a positive rather than coming from a deficit mindset in the asking of that question, if that's okay. That's just was my first thought that I
Love
I
it.
had
So
to say.
change regardless to, what was the word you said?
Inclusive.
Inclusive. You bet. You bet. Just the first page. And if you're done with the first page, does anyone need more time with the first page? Let's take a look starting at the top of the first page. Was there anyone that felt the first item was not a 3, was a 1 or a 2 in an area that needs improvement or making progress? I think I saw one hand go up. Godfrey, can you share your thoughts about that? Why that item and what focus you think it needs? Can you share that? And all this information will be incredibly helpful for the superintendent to hear and understand, and also for other board members to hear, to engage in discussion about that, since these are governance items. Sir, your thoughts?
So the evidence I've had has been presented, in forms of surveys, individual conversations with youth, and information shared to me from about conversation with youth, shared with me through different cabinet members during committee meetings. In terms of the evidence needed to kind of concretely say we are doing this is evidence hearing from all the students, and being clear that we've heard from all of them, and that we are clear that what we are soliciting, that will be taken into feedback to change things or just information. But in the absence of any concrete evidence to display that we've heard from youth, is why we're at a 2 and making progress towards it. I have nothing to validate or show that where we need to go to enhance or kind of where we stand now.
Got it. Other individuals with a 1 or 2 or a comment based on what your colleague has shared?
For sure. So Godfrey, I'm really glad that you said that, because I think in looking at the question, it's very clear to me that as a board and as a district, we're trying to be a 3. But I think the data that we're actually succeeding, like Godfrey, I think you expressed it very well, that we in listening to the experiences of children in the district and families, everyone certainly always has the best of intentions. And, I don't know that our data says that we have succeeded as a 3 in there. And I should say by data, I don't mean testing assessments. I mean the experiential data of the kids that we're serving.
Yeah, and let's keep that in mind. The data has to be so much broader than just a state level. There's so much more. So very much more. Any other individuals want to speak on that item?
Well, it's kind of, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's kind of a loaded question because, we're elected to put children first. But if you do put children first and we make recommendations based on putting children first, as a taxpayer, some of that's in conflict. And, in a district our size where there's not a lot of money to go around, sometimes you have to choose children over the larger needs of the community. So I think that's, where we struggle with when we are putting children first, we are condemned as elected members of a board that we're not putting taxpayers first. So I think we have to decide, are we truly as board members putting children first, or do we always have to have that hat on of also putting children first, but also balancing the needs of the community as a taxpayer, in which case it would always, rightly be a 2 and it shouldn't be a 3.
Hmm.
And I would add, we definitely strive to be at a 3, but when we don't make that mark, it's when we allow interpersonal issues within our community to infringe upon our decision-making for children. And that takes on multiple forms that I think the community is aware of. But whenever we do that, we lose track of this goal. And it's harmful to our community.
Others? It will be interesting to see how these comments can tie through later and tomorrow when you're talking about priorities, and how in the priorities, taking it in the students first, the students as primary, how will that tie through in the priorities that you talk through tomorrow for the superintendent? Because I heard the word intent used earlier. You know, I have always intended when I get to a crosswalk and I see a little old lady crossing the street, I intend to get out of the car and help her across the street. Can't say I've ever actually done it, but I intend to do it. It will be that turning intention into action, because for kids, it's action that counts more than the intention. So this will be a great piece to see how that ties into your discussion tomorrow around priorities. Well, let's look at the
particularly, Dr. Gorman, just one comment, particularly when the interests of children sometimes go against the interest of adults, in the sense that we may say we need the kids to stay in school longer and a longer day for teachers, but the teachers say that's not something that we're willing to negotiate in a contract. So sometimes the pain point is not just about finding money as a resource, but it's also time.
Let's take a look at the second bullet. We uphold all applicable federal and state laws and anybody not have that as a 3? And I can't see everyone at once. So if you do, and you know what? I am going to see everyone at once. Hold on.
There we go. I actually just wanted to ask a clarifying question. Do you mean as a board or as a district?
This would be you as a board.
Okay.
As a district, your responsibility would be to point it out to the superintendent.
Yeah, got you.
She has that. As board, anyone not view this as a 3? In theory, if you didn't view that as a 3, my guess is you'd be violating your oath of office in some way, shape, or form, right? Let's look at the next. We abide by the policies and bylaws of the board and work with each other to change those policies as needed to improve student achievement. Anyone not have that as a 3? Okay.
Barbara, are you raising your hand? Go ahead.
I think we are tending towards a 3. The difficulty with the policies is that there are so many, and we don't review them regularly, and not, so it's easy to not be in compliance with something in the policy if it's not on somebody's.
Do you have a policy committee?
We do.
So a policy committee to do the regular reviews, et cetera?
Yes, can I interject for a minute? We do. I'm actually the policy chair. I've been the chair for I guess it's 5 years now. It's hard to remember, but it's about 5 years. But we do. We have regular meetings, and we look at all of our key policies, which we've revised and changed and added. So it's a very active and thorough committee that meets monthly, sometimes even more often, depending on what work needs to be done. But and in any of our committees, which we always do, whether it's policy or facilities, negotiations, we always try to, especially with policy and facilities, is really when we have our board meetings, to discuss it. So in policy, to give you an idea, we discuss it, we vet it, we might have several meetings for a policy. Then once we take action as a policy committee, we bring it to the full board for discussion, and the whole board is involved in that. In addition, staff is involved, and many times we have presentations on particular policies. So the community can see it, as well as other board members as well, the whole board as a whole. In addition to that, then the subsequent meeting after that, we take action on it. Whether it goes through or it doesn't, the whole board decides on that. So I'm not sure, Barbara, do you want to, yeah, that's great.
I think my tiny quibble was with the word "we abide by," because some of our policies call for regular reports that we aren't actually executing. One that comes to mind, there was the inspection of the play equipment and the fire something or other. There was a policy when I was reading through, and I said, gosh, in my 3 years, I don't think we've ever had a report on this. And it would probably be good if we did. So it's a good policy, but we aren't truly abiding. So I think one thing that might be interesting is to take an inventory of our policies and really have a checklist of the annual reports that we are supposed to be reviewing. Similarly, the SGC policy has a line that says SGCs will report to the Board of Education their facilities needs. And that really happened in the 3 years that I've served, that we've had. And when it says Board of Education, it could say, well, STC will report to the superintendent, but that's not what it says. What it says is STCs will report to the Board of Education. And so I think some formalized reporting processes and a calendar, getting back to my West tendencies, I like a good checklist and a good project management timeline. I think a review of that nature would really help us as a district.
Yes, so Alex taking notes through this and myself and Robert doing coaching with her. One of the things we'll talk with her about is how do you do a thorough review of all reports, looking what reports are required, bringing back to you a thorough list of what reports are required, make sure that's still what you want. If you don't want it, change the policy. If you do want it, calendar it, create it as an owner, make sure it's not an orphan, put it in the process for someone, and make sure you get it. Great. Great point. Great.
If I can just scoot very quickly and say that my thought was the policies relative to the actual organization and functioning of the board itself. And I think that's been, for me personally, a little bit of a learning curve because I came to be chair in an unexpected way. And so I know that for my own self, that's an area that I have to learn about.
Great. Let's look at the next bullet with that happy amendment we had. Maintain board focus on the achievement of all students inclusive of race, class, ethnicity, or gender. Anyone not rated as a 3? Sorry, if someone's talking, I can't hear it.
We have a couple people that need to mute.
Yeah. I think this iteration of the board is very committed to that. So
I rated it as a 2. And I think I was thinking more of what people were saying about the intent of crossing the road versus the actual doing it. It's clear to me that as a body, we are as one and have the right intent here. And I think that Norwalk, like almost every other school district, is playing catch up with a long legacy of explicit discrimination in housing and education that we haven't really been able to completely address yet. So I think we're making progress. It's a positive thing. That's a number 2, but it's not a 3 just yet for me.
Great, great. And that, by the way, is a great example of a role the board can play in giving feedback to the superintendent about an expectation that emphasis, resources, efforts will be focused on addressing those needs. So, by the way, our board put that in board policy in Charlotte. They were shocked when I showed up at a housing meeting. And I showed at a housing meeting because there was a issue of putting more low-income housing in a low-income area. And I said, why aren't we putting low-income housing in another area? Because if we're going to address equity, having more students that are struggling financially into an attendance zone with schools, and then suddenly some of the people came back and said, whoa, 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 we meant it, but we didn't mean it like that. Just understand when you give direction for someone, they might run with that. So not saying you need to do anything about that, but just as a thought, that's the kind of things that come into play when you live and don't just aspire.
for sure. And if I can actually just say to Colin's point, the 3 I think is on the focus. I think as a group of people on the board, our focus on this issue is very strong. And I agree with Colin that the execution, of course, is not where it should be. So.
And that would be in alignment with Godfrey's points on number 1, that the intent is there, but he's not seen the actions or heard from the children that it's there yet. So similar in concept. Next, we do not use our position for personal gain or partisan gain. A 3 for everyone? Anything not a 3?
Yeah,
Not here.
I put a 2, and that is entirely because it is very hard to escape the fact that these are politically elected positions. And while I believe all board members do their best to rise above that, it's very hard in the public arena to escape the politics of it. So I think we are making progress, but I don't think these are purely nonpartisan roles just yet.
I would second that. I also put 2.5 because I think it's very hard to do this work without having to be aware of the political landscape. And the longer you're in it, the more your awareness is of that, for better or for worse. So I think we can't pretend that it's not a piece of the puzzle.
Thank you. Next, we model continuous learning. Anyone not a 3?
Yeah, definitely. 1 was what I rated. Just simply establishing what it looks like, our expectation for how the district follows this. I don't believe we've agreed on a method that we want to all invest and focus our efforts in to be able to say we are modeling it in the same manner. And when I just look at the areas of improvement, the absence of a conversation around what it is that we want to be, that we expect our staff and teachers to really work with our students to help them become. If we haven't had that conversation, there's no way the answer to this could be anything beyond a need for priority of improvement.
Anyone else? Great, let's go to the next. We maintain a strategic plan for the district that clearly defines success and accountability for the board, staff, and students. Anyone not a 3? Next, we focus on the policy work of the board and monitor progress on the district indicators of success, leaving day-to-day operations to the staff. This is essentially living the item you talked about earlier in the earlier discussion. Anyone not a 3?
Would it be appropriate to ask staff if they feel that's the case, or is this just us evaluating ourselves?
You put staff in a very interesting spot.
I don't want to put anybody in an awkward position, but I do
Yeah.
feel like, the 4 windows theory of the self, where in the first window, there's things that you know about yourself that everybody knows. And then in the second window, there's things that you know about yourself that other people don't know. Then there's things that they know about you that you don't know. And that's the window that I'm interested in. But if that would be too awkward that we don't have to do it, that's fine.
And I would encourage you to, that is a role Alex can play for bringing that feedback back in a slightly different format. But your
Gotcha.
point is well taken. If you don't get that view, you're really missing out on an opportunity. Other individuals want to speak on that who don't have it as a 3? Mike, I thought I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I did have it as a 2. And it's just more of an observation than anything else. And, the activity the board has taken or emails where, there's been a lot of direction given to staff by board members.
Which is not in alignment with the policy as shared earlier in the presentation. Other folks who have that, not as a 3?
I had it as a 2 because I also have observed, especially people weighing in on personnel issues, which I think is outside of our purview. So I think that's important to note.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I had it as a 2 as well. I've, spoke about the fact that, I truly believe that this is the staff's core competency as a board member, as a taxpayer. We pay this staff a lot of money, and we do so because they are well educated in their fields, and we believe that they bring credibility and experience in their fields. And I think that we should lean on them to really, again, be at the helm and be the people on the ground and doing the day-to-day work.
Thank you. Anyone else?
If I can say, did anyone not have that as a 2?
Aha. Anyone not a 2?
If I could just add in, I had a 2. I think that was a good way of putting it, Sarah, asking if anybody else didn't have that, but I did put mine as a 2 as well. And, I think we've got a stellar staff that works really collaboratively together in a cohesive manner for many, many years. I know firsthand working with Dr. Costanza, we've worked on policy for many years, and it's just having those kind of relationships where you can, if you need to, pick up the phone and talk to that liaison, talk to that person that you're working so closely with. But at the same time, I think it's a balancing act. You don't want to overwhelm staff. Again, I'd mentioned before, we're here to set policy. We don't run the day-to-day operations as far as managing, and that's the superintendent's role. But I think we don't also want to overstep boundaries, and we want to be able to have that contact with the superintendent, but then she manages her staff. So it would be interesting to know, and I know it might not be in this forum, and I think it might have been touched upon by Sarah before, but how staff feels about that. We don't want to overwhelm staff, but having some kind of leeway or chain to reach certain staff members if we need to, but again, to not overwhelm them with too much information or too many requests. So I think we need to be mindful of that as well.
And you do have some pretty sound protocols for information sharing and requests, and you've got a hierarchical structure to accomplish that. So you've got some good information there in policy. And I believe Robert's going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow with you all.
Great.
Okay. What about next? We base decisions on facts, vote our convictions, avoid bias, and support the decisions of the board once a decision is made.
I'd like to speak
Anyone?
on that one.
Go.
Yes.
Following up with what Heidi was saying, I think right now we're in very unprecedented waters, and we had to make a lot of decisions for budget, policies, distance learning. And first, I want to thank the staff for all the extra time, for all the information that we needed. I know that we asked for a lot. I know that we had a lot of questions. We needed more details. Don't take it personally. And it wasn't that we don't trust anyone. It's just new waters for us. We're all learning. We needed the extra information in order to be able to make good decisions and vote. And I think that this Board of Education right here, we agree to disagree, and we're very respectful of each other. And we do ask each other questions a lot too. So it's not that we just ask the staff, we ask each other questions. And I know for me, it was very important that the new superintendent, we would be able to communicate. And in the short period of time, in less than a month, we've seen a very, very big change in communication between emails and videos and things like that. So I think we're moving in the right direction.
Very good.
Yeah, can I just add that, Diana, that's a great point. Like that extra insight as a new board member. I often use the phrase "educate me," because I need the team to backfill me on what were the considerations leading up to this recommendation. And I think that the community needs to know that we were informed in our decision making, and that we did evaluate this again, not as a rubber stamp, because that's constantly thrown out there, that we did have that data collection exercise and that request for information. And it wasn't to step on people's toes. It was really just that educational piece. So that's an excellent point, Diana, that there's a balance between asking to be educated on a topic and making sure that the due diligence was done versus interfering in the day-to-day.
I can also
I would-
say, oh, Barbara, go ahead.
Thanks. I just would piggyback on that and say that it's really difficult from our point of view to know what that balance is. And for us, I think it was very important that whatever was done, we could own with integrity. And there was nothing done that we didn't know about. So that if the community was angry with us, they had good reason to be. We made a choice that they didn't like. But what's very difficult as a board member is when a choice is made, we're not informed, and then we're required to own it to the public. And that's the difficult tension, I think, of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's a good point, and I think that the public's expectations of the board is constantly something that we have to very explicitly clarify, which is tricky. I wanted to speak to the first part of the rubric question. We base decisions on facts, and I think that this board is as good a group of as any people in really attempting to do that. But I also think it's very important to maintain an awareness that it's a huge human weakness, thinking that you have made a decision based on facts and not monitoring for your own opinion or preconceptions. I don't think we do a bad job at that, but I also think it's really, really crucial to keep in mind that human beings are bad at that. And I just felt like that was important to say.
We are fallible. Next one, we build trust between and among each other, treating everyone with dignity, respect, even in times of disagreement.
Okay, on that one, I think the very first time we were all together in a room was for the most important decision that we had to make for the Norwalk Public Schools. It took days, hours, questions, time, but we were all respectful of each other, ideas, suggestions, what they wanted to see in the superintendent. And I think moving forward with a decision that's so important, that we've learned from each other, our strengths, our weaknesses, and that as a group, we can come together and make a decision, vote on something, and not be arguing or disrespectful to one another.
Next, we maintain the confidentiality of privileged information, including what's shared in executive sessions.
No.
No, not a 3 or no?
No, not a 3. It's an area about which I have concerns.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody else wants to speak about
I
that.
also have concerns in this area, and I think it impacts our ability to
Not a
trust each
3 for
other.
me either.
Only a 1 for me.
Some discussion on this. That it would be helpful for your superintendent to understand.
We've had real
about this.
difficulty maintaining confidentiality of information that we've shared just among ourselves in executive sessions or in caucus.
Any other comments? Any other feedback?
I would add that I think this ties into that piece about partisanship or political. When information from executive session is used for political purposes, it's really harmful for the community.
I think, go ahead, Diane.
Go ahead, Erica.
I was just going to say, and I think, when it's come up, unfortunately, in, social media and other platforms, there's this expectation by the community that what we do has to happen in public. And I think that there's a difference between what happens in public and public decisions and what is teased out in the background and what we collaborate on and what we share insights on and go back and forth as a team, and we really have to come together as a team and be willing to have those conversations and those brainstorms where no question answered is dumb and no suggestion presented is a bad suggestion. There has to be that flow of information if we're going to make any real impact, and we can't have this fear that it's going to leak out to the community before it's ripe to do so.
I agree with Erica that it does come out into the community at times sooner than we had expected or voted on. It has started miscommunication with staff in schools, with parents, just the community and the Board of Ed. I also feel that us new board members went through training and we were told about laws, regulations, confidentiality, and all of that. And I feel that the whole board, even the veterans, sorry, Heidi, should all have sat through that. So if we can move forward with some type of training or like a refresher course for everybody, I think that would help too in reminding everyone that confidentiality is a big thing in being on the board.
If I can just add on again for what Diana was mentioning, I think additional can be brief training, but on that, confidentiality is so crucial and critical for our work. So especially in exec session. So whether you're a newer member, a senior member, doesn't matter. I think any type of training is always just to reinforce that, just reinforcing any learning that we have, any meetings that we have, education for us, even as board members, again, is critical to the work that we need to continue doing.
I remember when I started my career, it was shared with me that in our business, power is information and access. And sometimes people choose to share the information they have access to in the position of power. I'm not saying that's what happens here, but we don't have trade secrets you can cash in on or things like that. It's other reasons. So very good. Thank you for sharing on that one. We recognize that authority rests with only the board majority decisions of the board and make no independent commitments. Anyone not a 3? Okay. We refer constituent complaints and concerns to the appropriate person within the district chain of command.
I think that's another one, like another 2.5, where I think this board tries very hard to do that and is not 100% successful. I don't know. If
And
anybody...
that's something I think that we have to reset on with Dr. Estrella, because I know the old board was told, was given a chain of command, and Julie did some work around actually publishing something. But in our orientation, Dr. Adamowski had us send everything to him and just copy who we thought was the appropriate chief. So with Dr. Estrella, I think we probably just need some guidelines of how she would like that to work.
Yeah. Just to review the comms protocols.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to be working on that tomorrow. Thank you.
And also, I think in that work that we'll be working on tomorrow, you want to be able to reply back to constituents' concerns. But at the same time, you have 9 members. And I think you do need to have a chain of command, because you're not sure on who's replying back to whom. And it could be 1 or 2 people, or it could be all 9. But I think having that chain of command and working with Alex on that will be an important factor for us.
And that's another thing I'd love to tease out is, I know our communications team is pulled so thin, but in my opinion, it puts so much pressure on Sarah to centralize that communication from the board that it would be great if we could just, forward it to an appropriate member of the staff and have them respond. So we're not responding on their behalf, and communication is truly centralized with the communications team versus coming, through Sarah, God bless her, she can answer every single email, or through one of us that try to pick it up. Because I think we did a really good job in the beginning of trying to make Sarah the point person, but God love her, there's been so much that's been going on. There's no way that you can be the point person on all of these things. So I think we need to be, Yeah, I think we got to pivot and say, I know Brenda is also pulled, very thin, but we got to solve for this because
And
we can't all be
I would,
responding
I would
separately.
agree with that.
Yeah.
And I would just add, creating structures and procedures that use technology to do some of this. So having a Google Doc with current questions or something, and also just being able to have the documents that are usually given at committee meetings on an intranet available to us so that we can find things quickly and the staff can as well.
Perfect items for tomorrow. Fabulous.
Can I
Thank you.
add one more thing? I'm sorry, before we go on.
Sure,
I think
sure.
also whether it's in communications has always been for me a big platform. It's just so important. And we've come a long way, especially with Brenda. We've really, really strived, worked hard on improving that. We have. So I think we've got a great communications department. But I think in response to this and inquiries and concerns from people that just have issues and want to be heard, instead of waiting, we want to make sure we're responsive. Even if we don't have the answer right away, a simple, I received your concern, I'm working on it, I'll get back to you. And I don't even feel it should be an automated response. It should be, whether it's in Brenda's office in communications, wherever it may be, but just a reply back, hey, I got your email, I share your concern, let me see what I can do. I will follow up with you within X amount of days. I think just that we need to continuously do that. So when we have parents, staff, whoever it may be, just so they're heard and that we're working on the matter.
Like maybe it's and I know we're going to talk about this tomorrow. Maybe it's if they're sending it just to the board, which they often do, and don't copy the superintendent or the chief, maybe we simply reply back as a protocol, copy everybody on the board so they know that somebody has responded, and saying, I'm looping in Dr. Estrella. I forget who did that today. Somebody did that today. Maybe it was Barbara. Or I'm looping in, this general mailbox, but it's not a general mailbox. It's not going to a black hole, just so we know that it actually, they know that we heard them, that we escalated it, and that it's in the queue to be addressed. And then whoever responds back keeps us all copied so we know that it was closed.
There's a group called the Center for Reform of School Systems, which is a bunch of former school board members who all got together. They have developed a protocol to do exactly that. The steps, the process, how to do it. And Robert Avosa is going to share that info with you tomorrow. For example, you turn it over to staff, you expect staff to respond in 72 hours or less. They copy it and share it with the board. They track the 10 trends of the concerns that come in, and they report to the board, hey, board, we've had 52 things that came into you over the last 9 weeks. Interestingly, 48 of them were about athletics. Maybe we need to take a step back and talk about athletics. That there's a process for doing that. Robert's going to talk about
so
that.
not only do I know the process, I lived it as chief of staff in Charlotte. I managed it. I developed it further with the board secretary. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. These are all incredibly valid things. When you're an elected official, people expect you to respond and expect some sort of reply back saying that the issue's either been closed or it's a continuing ongoing investigation, et cetera. We'll get to that tomorrow.
Great.
We'll have plenty of time to talk about it.
Let's look at the last one. We respect leadership roles of the board chair and superintendent. Anyone not a 3? Great. Can you please, the second page goes much faster. Can you please look at the second page and can you please rate it 1 to 3? And you don't necessarily have to do that first item because you have policies about board. You're pretty darn good on that one. If you, well, do we do this? You got pretty good policies and you got a committee. In 5 years deserves a meritorious service award for doing policy committee for 5 years. Kudos. We ready to move on this one? Let's take a look. Do we need to do the policy one, the first four? Are you all good on that? We can do that one if you want. Moving on. All right. I got from the board chair well, let's keep going on that one. I'm with you. Hire a superintendent, adequately compensate, honor contract provisions. Well, I hope so. You're pretty new on that one. Anyone not a 3? Let's go to the next. Provide constructive feedback on superintendent performance and governance team performance. Well, lo and behold, you're right in the darn middle of governance team performance right now. And the superintendent really hasn't had much time to get that feedback yet. Anybody not a 3 on that item? Moving on. Establish and implement plan for monitoring district success in compliance with its policies and ensure appropriate management oversight of the district.
I think I already addressed this, but I was a 2.
Do you want to elaborate at all? I had thought that just the last piece of it, the oversight piece always can be improved. Is that what you mean? Okay.
Okay. Let's go on to the next. Adopt a budget aligning resources with district indicators of success.
We really tried.
We really, really tried. And now it could all disappear if we don't have funding for reopening.
Yeah, the revenue decreases due to shrinking in tax, it's gonna hit. Okay, so you felt comfortable 3 with the most recent process, okay. Connect with community, promote community understanding and partnerships.
I think we can do better.
I feel this is an area for growth for us.
Yeah.
We do a lot of things that try to work on this, but it's sort of somehow still disjointed. So the more we can kind of pull that into one cohesive movement, I think the stronger we'll be.
I think on my end, it's the different languages in Norwalk. We need to try and reach out to the non-English speaking families and also get on the ground. I know I'm on the ground a lot. I see a lot of families. I go to different schools, and many families, even though they have a smartphone, they're not on Facebook. They're not 24/7 on their emails. And if the emails go out, they can't understand them or read them. So we need to try to find a way or change something, which we already took the first step on, and try to reach. And if it's not through the adults, it's maybe through the students.
Got
For
it.
sure. And I also think there are parts of our community in Norwalk that obviously have historically felt very shut out of decision making, and we are committed to doing a better job with that, but we obviously can still do much better with that as well.
Agreed on that point.
Okay. Next, appropriately help constituents with complaints, problems, concerns. It seems hard that you would list it as a 3 when you said you gotta. It would be disjointed if in what we said on the other sheet it wasn't that it ties into the other one. Would that be accurate?
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah. See prior page. All right.
And I think the tension in that for us, when we talk about those tension points, is that constituents expect us to be there for them and get some whatever result. And the process of redirecting, if not done well, can leave them feeling that they have not been served by their elected officials. So if we redirect, we really need the staff then to make sure to get to a positive closure on the issue, or it looks like we were unable to help.
I would just caveat that with an understanding of expectations that people have about what is possible to be done or not done, and that's always a delicate thing too.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll also add that, the community doesn't always come to us via email, in a very tight buttoned up at board communication. 99% of the time, the community's feedback happens in social media pages. And, we talk about how we're serving the community. I think we need to go where they are and listen and play back, what they're saying and address their questions head on. Otherwise, it is just spiraling out of the control. A large majority of the time, it's based on inaccurate information that's being put out into social media. And it's absolutely a product of our budget and the resources we have to address those things. But it is an evolution of how we communicate with each other, and we need to change with that. Otherwise, we're not listening and we're not communicating. If we expect, that we're going to build something and they come to us, we have to go to them.
I think that's a salient point, and I also want to caveat that one too by saying that I think can be important for us to be educational with the people we serve about the distortions that can happen in social media, and that we don't have any time to get into that, but I just wanted to put that on the end of your statement.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first rule I learned as a superintendent was never read the comment section after an article. It can be staggering. Yep. But you need to see what people are saying. Let's go to the next one. Engage in professional development individually and collectively to improve governance.
I think this is an area where we have a lot of growth opportunity. I remember when I joined the board and I went to the CABE orientation, I was like looking forward to seeing my colleagues, and I was the only one there. So the struggle is, of course, that most of us work and have families, and it's very hard to, as we know from our superintendent search, that it's hard to find times that work for all of us. But if we can seek out opportunities to learn and in tandem with each other so that we have a common background of relatedness and material that we're digging into, which is what I love about the book that we are working on this week. That really gives us the opportunity to learn together and continue our personal development and group development as a board.
Powerful.
I also want to say too that definitely an area we always for sure need to improve upon. When I first took the position, I was shocked how there wasn't reference to who we're talking about in Norwalk. I understand there's a learning curve to being a board member, but how none of the onboarding talked about our kids. There was no context given to apply what we're doing and who we're serving. And, we're growing in this area, making, I think, some of the right strides around how we have the work with Dr. Fergus taking place. But it to me, it was a missing link, to be a board member in a city like Norwalk and not at all talk about diversity or bias. It's crazy to not talk about who we're going to serve and any reference of pieces of orienting people to such a powerful role. Sorry, not powerful, meaningful.
I would agree. I have found that the most information in those areas have come to me through the work with Norwalk Act, that I have learned a great deal from them about our community and the needs that we have here, and the conversation that's centered there. I'm looking forward to bringing that conversation here.
You know, I think we can all agree how important PD is. When I first came on the board a while back, basically I just sat in my seat and learned and watched, and that's how I grew. But I wish even back then, and as we continue on over the years and in the present, ongoing PD, whether it's done sometimes individually, and then you present that information back to the full board as a whole, or you do it collectively. But I think in any organization, there's always PD, always team building, which I know, Alex, we're all going to be working on, but it's so important to the success of the board. And if we have a successful board, we have obviously a successful community and school district, which we do, but there's always room for improvement. So I think ongoing PD is really important, just like you have with your staff will be ongoing PD for board members. I think we should try to work on that as well.
Very good. And last one on this page, perform other actions required by law. Anything you know you got to do, you do, I'm assuming, right? Otherwise, you'd be in violation of the law. Okay. Let's go to the third page, which is more about communications. It's much shorter. We're rounding the home stretch. Can you please take some time and rate these items on number 3? Rate these items on page 3, excuse me, not number 3, page 3. Need more time? Are you ready? Let's take a look then. Number 1, refer employee concerns to the point of the problem and or to the superintendent. Anyone not rated as a 3?
I think these first two we've sort of touched upon, that it's an area that we could do better about in other questions. If anybody disagrees.
I agree with you. I think the first two we've kind of already discussed before and what we do.
I'm not sure I heard the employee piece. I heard more what I thought was constituent, but I'm hearing you say those two together, area for growth.
For sure.
Great.
So, I'll comment on the employee piece. I think there's a lot of sensitivity around this in Norwalk. There's been a lot of conversation about retaliation. And as a board, what we report and who do we report to, there's some sensitivity around that.
Okay. Let's go to number 3 then. Contact superintendent if a concern raised by a constituent is potentially serious or may require a policy change. You immediately let the big stuff, you let superintendent know right away. Okay. Number 4, communicate requests for district information to the superintendent. Now you have a policy committee, or excuse me, a committee structure though. How does that work with this? Just thoughts, folks?
So I think sometimes if it's a discipline specific request, for example, if it's something about special education or something about facilities or something about a specific area, then we will refer to, oh, I lost my page. Darn it. We'll refer to the appropriate central office person and not jump right to the superintendent. How did I lose that piece of paper? That digital piece of paper. I got it. Okay, here we go. Does anybody else have a thought about that?
Okay. What about the
sorry,
next?
I was on mute.
Yes.
I would say that I think to Sarah's point and to Peter's point, there could be a high level of clarity because we work in committees, because we work with specific central office staff on different priorities. It often makes sense to go to that staff person to get different information. I think that in the past, we've been told we should go directly to the superintendent. And I don't know what the preferred practice is.
Sir, you were going to talk about it tomorrow. That is on the agenda. Yep, great. But Colin, your point is, let me know the rules of the game so I know who I'm supposed to go to, and I'll go to that person. I'll follow that. Just tell me what the expectation is. Okay. Next, discuss. Yes. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think once we establish those rules, some consistency, you know, if you see one thing happening with one board member and something different happen with somebody else, that starts to feel inequitable.
Very good. What about the next? Discuss any concerns regarding what the superintendent has or has not done with the superintendent only?
I would say historically, board practice has not been to do that. And I'm hopeful that we will establish that as a norm moving forward in this new relationship with the new superintendent.
Okay. Anyone else comments? Okay. Last one, maintain fidelity to fellow board members, board policies and governance team when communicating with the media. Anyone not a 3?
I think in general, we've done much better with the media this year. We've been more disciplined and letting the professional staff manage that piece.
Okay. Anyone else?
For sure. I think there's, you know, historically what has happened and how we are changing ourselves as an organization to move forward.
Very good. Now, this information, you've given an awful lot of information for Alex to process for how does she work with you all more effectively? How does she meet your needs? But there's other items for you to take up and think about as a group, a governance body. For example, the item about information from closed session or caucus, whatever the terminology is, that's one that you in essence have to be self-policing on. So there's certainly plenty of things for you all to talk about, but there's other items for Alex to act on. And there's other items from here that will relate back to the priorities you talk about tomorrow. A great deal of them will be covered during the communications section. And Robert will cover that. Robert, can you talk a little bit about tomorrow?
Yes, it's my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you for letting me listen in. It was very important for me to understand the context by which I'll be leading the second portion. You know, earlier I was trying to, you know, give you a little bit of a background about who I am and how I've worked with different school boards. I had a very difficult and complicated school board in Fulton County, Georgia. Our district was the haves and the have-nots, like an extreme you've never seen before. North Atlanta is incredibly wealthy, although very diverse. It had the second highest proportion of African-American wealth in the country, only behind the Maryland, DC area, and then a very, very poor southern region. And the board members really believed that where they stood on issues were a reflection of the community. So I have a lot of experience working with school boards and have seen some good success. That same board, after 4 years, won the National Association of School Boards Board of the Year. So when you put systems and processes in place, we can get to a good place where everybody feels like they're part of the system and their voices are being heard. So tomorrow we're going to go through communication protocols. We're going to talk about board priorities. And we're also going to talk about how, when Pete earlier was talking about the alignment that exists between priorities, goals, the way we spend our time, people, and money, and the superintendent's evaluation. Ultimately, at the end of the day, everything that moves up to that Board of Education and superintendent evaluation needs to be aligned and coherent. And we'll be helping Alex and the team. My responsibility has been with the team, Tom, Frank, and others on the team about trying to bring those two things together. So we're going to have a rich conversation tomorrow. Hopefully we'll be able to get through everything that we have, and I'm looking forward to it.
Alex, what time are they all back tomorrow?
8 a.m. on the dot.
Okay, in same format with this format's a lot better than the early one. And I don't know why, but I had headphones in and I was leaning in. I realized as I was doing that, it doesn't get any louder when you have headphones in if you lean into the
For
train
sure.
that way.
We're gonna have to adapt at least for this the morning portion to do it like this, and then when
Does
we
it make sense to have us convene by Zoom in the morning and then come physically after lunch for those people that are coming physically?
Yeah, can they be home and Zoom in, Alex?
Would that make more sense?
Say that again?
Would it make more sense to have everyone convene by Zoom for the part that Robert is doing in the morning, and then people who are going to attend physically, have them attend physically after lunch to break it up that way? Would that make sense? Because then you wouldn't have to scare up any extra laptops or do any kind of
I mean,
tech.
that would be fine. There's a very we ordered lunch, and we have a
Right.
very small period of time, only 30 minutes between Robert's session and ConCan that will follow by Dr. Fergus's work.
Okay.
So I don't know if you will have enough time to transition from your home here.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Could we
Okay.
adjust the time schedule, or is that locked in?
Do
Like,
you want,
could we just move a half an hour, the afternoon session back by half an hour?
I would
So
have to ask both the presenters if that's possible.
that would be great.
You
'Cause
want me to do that, or?
I think so. It means that all of us are exposed less in person. And then we could actually have lunch maybe outside, which takes care of the issue of having to take the mask down to eat, and then convene back at a specific time that works in your mind logistically.
The challenge, I think Dr. First has a hard stop.
Oh, I
So
see.
if we do
I
that,
can make some modification if it helps. I think you had me down from 8 till what?
To
8 to
12?
8 to noon.
Right.
You
I'm
can
sorry, go ahead,
finish
Dr.
earlier.
Norman.
I think you can finish
Exactly.
that earlier to give you. What if he was
We
done at
can go to
11:30?
11:30.
Okay.
We go
That
to
would work.
11:30.
Great.
The
A
food,
lot of the rich conversation I needed to hear, I've heard tonight,
outside.
in terms of beginning to see some issues emerge, I guess.
Okay. I think it just seems like it'd be easier to have people on their own devices rather than, and also to Barbara's point about the health and safety of everybody, I think is very salient as well. So if that works, I think it's a good plan.
Thank you for your time and energy tonight. We appreciate it very much.
Alex, are you saying something?
I just want to go reiterate the schedule for tomorrow. So from 8 to 11:30, Dr. Avosa will engage in the rest of the communications and governance component of the conversation. I'm assuming people will come here for lunch because we ordered lunch. And then at 12:30, we will transition to ConCan, which is going to have a presentation around district-wide data that will nicely tie to the equity work that will begin at 12:45 with Dr. Fergus.
Great.
Okay. I think I'll leave it up to people to decide if they want to do it here or if they want to do it at home.
Okay.
We'll have
But
the
either way, the Zoom, I think having everybody in the Zoom is the most functional for talking and listening. So,
correct. So we'll do it that way tomorrow.
okay. Okay, great. Shall we say goodnight and adjourn then?
Yes.
Okay. Since we're in a retreat format, do we need to have a